Under the punishing heat of the Ouagadougou sun, Aminata Sankara collapsed to her knees outside the towering gates of the presidential palace, her trembling hands gripping a weathered photograph of her late husband as anguished sobs tore from her throat, the raw, unfiltered wail of a woman who had lost everything. "President Traoré, my children are dying. Please, just listen to me," she pleaded, voice cracking with desperation as guards approached, their faces stiff with emotionless professionalism. Inside, the cool, air-conditioned halls of power felt a world away. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 35-year-old president of Burkina Faso, was locked in a heated cabinet meeting when a whisper from his aide cut through the room. "She's been out there for 3 hours. Security wants to remove her." But Traoré's gaze drifted to the window, where her cries still pierced the thick glass. Something about her voice, the pain, the truth in it, broke through the political theater surrounding him. In a country where protests are often staged and outrage sold like currency, this felt real. When he heard her husband was a village chief who had uncovered evidence about French mining corruption, his thoughts flashed back to his own past, to the day French forces bulldozed his family's small gold claim, labeling it illegal, and the image of his mother's tears, helpless in the dust. Aminata's story had begun months ago in the remote village of Tinakov, where her husband Musa had served as chief for over 20 years. Their land, rich with gold dust and passed down for generations, had never brought wealth, only survival. But everything changed when Gold Star International, a French mining consortium, arrived under the banner of development, armed with geological surveys and government permits. Entire families were uprooted overnight, ancestral lands turned into strategic national resources, and compensation promises vanished like smoke. Musa refused to betray his people with a signature. He collected evidence, photos, audio recordings, lists of bribes paid to regional officials, proof that the so-called development was little more than legalized plunder. When offered a briefcase full of money, enough to buy a home in the capital and send their children to France, he told Aminata, "Some things cannot be bought." But justice came with a price. The threats began, strange calls at night, cars parked outside their compound, unfamiliar faces asking too many questions. Still, Musa pressed on, driven by a moral fire his wife both feared and revered. Then came the breakthrough. A young, disillusioned engineer from inside Gold Star handed Musa secret company documents, evidence of massive tax fraud, illegal extraction, and a corruption web stretching deep into the previous government's veins. But the walls were already closing in. Gold Star's private security network, ex-soldiers, paid informants, trained silencers, had been watching Musa for weeks. They knew about the files. They knew about the whistleblower. And most terrifying of all, they knew Musa was getting close to exposing the truth. Now, with Musa gone, Aminata stood alone outside the gates of power, not just as a grieving widow, but as the last voice for a silenced man and a betrayed nation. Her cries no longer just grief, but a battle cry echoing across a wounded land on a humid Tuesday evening, just days before he was to travel to Ouagadougou to present explosive evidence to the new president. Musa prepared quietly, unaware that shadowy eyes were watching his every move. As he packed his notes, armed men surrounded his compound. Neighbors later spoke of gunshots, screams, then eerie silence. No one dared approach until morning. When they finally did, Musa was gone, his body dumped in the village well, bullet wounds clear, yet the official cause of death declared accidental drowning, a cruel joke to anyone who knew he'd been an expert swimmer since childhood. His research, the documents he'd spent months collecting, had vanished. 6 months later, Aminata Sankara stood outside the presidential palace, a widow with nothing but her husband's photograph, the weight of grief, and a fragile hope that this young president, Ibrahim Traoré, might be different. Unknown to palace guards, hidden in the lining of her faded wrapper, was the last thing Musa had entrusted to her, a single damning document, one he told her to protect with her life. As security prepared to drag her away, Traoré, who had been listening through the thick glass, finally spoke, "Bring her to my office." Moments later, the great mahogany doors opened and Aminata found herself face to face with the youngest head of state in Africa. Ibrahim Traoré stood tall behind his desk, his calm military presence barely masking the storm brewing beneath. He gestured for her to sit, but it wasn't just the seat, it was the way he spoke in her native tongue, not French, that cracked something in Aminata's chest. When had a president last spoken to her as an equal? Ministers behind him shifted uncomfortably. One protested, suggesting this matter be dealt with through proper channels. Traoré's reply cut the air like steel. The proper channels failed her husband. One by one, His ministers dropped their gazes in shame. With trembling hands, Aminata reached into her wrapper and held the hidden document like sacred fire. "My husband discovered something," she whispered. "Something powerful men want to keep buried." Traoré leaned forward, his face hardening. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, Aminata unfolded a tale of systemic betrayal, late-night meetings between Gold Star executives and corrupt ministers, briefcases full of hush money exchanged in shadowy hotel lots, and forged environmental reports masking poisoned water and sick children. "They said the water was clean," she said, voice rising now with fire, "but the children couldn't breathe. Their skin burned. Their mothers cried." Each sentence peeled back another layer of rot embedded in the system. And then, with a hand that trembled not from fear, but from duty, she placed the final document in front of Traoré, a worn but intact Gold Star International Operations Report bearing the company's official seal. His eyes scanned its contents, and with each page, his expression darkened. The numbers were damning: 17 extraction sites producing over $2 billion in projected profits, while only 3 were declared to the government, with an expected revenue of just $200 million. "They're stealing from us," Traoré muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "They're literally stealing the future of this nation." And then he turned to the final section, the one titled simply, "Govern." As President Traoré turned to the final pages of the damning report, a suffocating silence descended upon the room. Under the heading Government, detailed records outlined monthly bribes and illicit payments made to high-ranking officials, and shockingly, included several names from Traoré's own cabinet. His eyes locked on a familiar name repeated again and again: Finance Minister Ouedraogo. The document laid out precise figures: 50,000 euros transferred in March, 75,000 euros in April, alongside confirmation of wire transfers to discrete Swiss accounts. Traoré's voice was low but cutting as he read aloud: 50,000 euros in March, 75,000 in April. Coincidentally, the same months you bought a new Mercedes, and that villa in the diplomatic quarter. Ouedraogo's face turned ghostly pale, his lips fumbling for a response. "Sir, those are lies." This woman,